Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Monday, February 10th, 2025, also known as Victory Monday to me. I'm your host, George Kurt, joined by the one and only Cody Roadcap. How are you today, Cody?
I'm doing great for a Monday.
It's not the Mondayest Monday that some coffee companies that were giving away free coffee were saying.
I mean, just a normal Monday for me.
I mean, I don't know if you're green in the background is for your team or mine, but I appreciate the aura in your background.
Bro, it is for my team. You know that. And if
I
we
do.
want to go down that rabbit hole real quick, just to irk you, because my favorite thing is to get under George's skin, and it's
Yes,
his
it is.
big day. But how about if you look at like hex codes and RGB, the Eagles are more blue than green. Did you know that?
The midnight green? Yeah, it is. It is more. It's funny how when you look at it on the field and stuff, it definitely looks more green. But if you were to just kind of, put it into like an editing software or something, it definitely does look more blue. It almost looks wrong.
Yeah. So that's your Tyler's oddball fact. That Eagles midnight green is actually more blue than green.
There you go, everybody out there. Cody dropping the knowledge. Make sure you're following us at the Couch Jams, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok to get more than you do from the show. You can always drop your comments in the DMs with any questions or comments you have, especially while we're on break. Today is our last episode until we get closer to the new NFL year, but we're going to be covering the Super Bowl. And make sure you're commenting anything that you want to have put on the air in the meantime. We'll be back in March. But, Cody, why don't we sit back, relax, and chat? A game happened yesterday.
It did.
I guess it wasn't much of a game. If you
George,
look at
gonna
it,
really just let me do this podcast without bringing my mic in? Wow, George, didn't even notice.
No, not even a bit. You sound better.
Thank you. I'm sure I did. It was way over there in the corner. You're just so jazzed up about what happened on Sunday.
I think we can understand why. My second favorite team, as you like to say, beat the Chiefs in Super Bowl 59. But like I said, it wasn't really much of a game.
Yeah, it wasn't much of a game. But George, I don't want to take anything away from you. We're going to break this game down. As an Eagles fan, the floor is yours.
There's so many things that I want to say, and I was trying pretty much all day to figure out where to start. I think we just saw the culmination of how complete of a team the Eagles were last night. And I mean, when we were talking in our preview show, I was like, I don't see Saquon Barkley really getting shut down. The Chiefs haven't been great against the run lately. And he was probably their worst player on offense for most of the game. He was, getting 1, 2, 3 yards pretty much every one of his carries. He got a couple of decent gains, caught a couple of passes, but the Eagles found a way to win otherwise on offense. And then on defense, to have almost a 50% pressure rate on drop back passes and not send a single blitz against the Chiefs is absolutely unheard of. And it's really going to make the Chiefs go to the drawing board because I feel like we're right back to where we were back when we had that Chiefs-Buccaneers Super Bowl, when they had to basically start rewriting their roster and their offense because they couldn't keep pressure out of Mahomes' face. And I don't know if it's a testament to the Eagles or if the Chiefs just weren't on it, but I'm surprised more teams couldn't do this to them with how easy it seemed for the Eagles to get home last night.
Yeah, I think first of all, if you listened on our preview show, we definitely went through and talked about how the Eagles were the best team top to bottom. And we've said that all playoffs, the Eagles were the best team top to bottom. And their defensive line is no exception. It's crazy. You could argue that I don't want to say disappointing because no one on the Eagles had a disappointing performance. Least impactful performance was Jalen Carter. Like he had one tackle, like it was everybody else. And that could be part of the problem. Like they just focused so much on him. Everyone else got to eat. But it's also something I think we as a society, as a podcast, I know me and you both picked the Eagles to win the game because of the talent gap, but just like put too much faith into Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and this team that has been, fraudulent to a degree with winning close games this whole time and being like, oh, this Eagles front four, front seven, however you want to describe it, is extremely elite. And they're starting a left guard at left tackle. Like, because their left tackle was out. Maybe that was the first thing we should have considered. And then it was
Something
like,
that I don't think even many people touched on. It wasn't even just us. I heard that almost nowhere going into this game.
Which is because Joe Tooney had played left tackle for 3 games now and had did a pretty good job, but it still was a guy out of position now going up elite talent. And I know we're going to talk about what next. And there's a lot of people that are up for free agency now for the Philadelphia Eagles, but that was an incredible, dominant performance from the defense in general. I was trying to figure out how a defensive player could get MVP. I thought if Josh Sweat would have got to 3 sacks, that might have got him. But then once Jalen Hurts hit that dime to Devonta Smith, that was like all she wrote when it came to the MVP conversation. And I think I'm the only one that, I haven't seen it anywhere. But for me, I thought it was really cool to see Hurts be able to hit Devonta Smith on a very similar play that Smith was able to catch in the national championship game, where obviously that was Tua throwing the ball, but Hurts got benched. So to come like full circle to be able to like make that play in a championship game with the same guy, I thought it was a really cool moment.
It is. And I mean, on top of it, there's so many storylines to go with Hurts because, you think he was part of a national championship team, but he got benched for Tua in that game. And then he came into the league, took over a starting job at the end of his first year, went to a Super Bowl and lost that heartbreaker to Mahomes before. And now to come back, face Mahomes again, and be able to get it done this time in pretty much convincing fashion, when the Chiefs were clearly going to say, we're going to make Jalen Hurts beat us. Like, they stacked the box the entire day. And Hurts had one of the best games of his career. Maybe numbers wise, he wasn't like putting up 350 yards, but you also have to remember, like, that hasn't been the NFL this year or even in the last 2. We're not in the era of the NFL where we're throwing for 5,000 yards in a season anymore. Defenses have kind of adjusted to that. So him being able to be accurate, complete over 70% of his passes, only throw that one turnover when he did get the pressure in his face. But for the most part, take care of the ball and make the plays when he needed to. I think Jalen Hurts has kind of proven that even though he's not the best pure quarterback in the league, he's come up in the clutch pretty much every single time the Eagles have asked him to. There's one bad postseason game I can point at for him, and it was the Buccaneers game last year. I'm not counting maybe his first ever playoff game. Because even in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, he came up big. The defense just couldn't make that last play for him. So I'm going to be going into the future looking at Jalen Hurts saying, yeah, sure, you can say he's not the best pure passer, but I don't care anymore if he has a bad game in September, because I know now coming into January, February, he's done nothing but show up.
So I hear that, and I feel like I'm always the Jalen Hurts guy, and I'm not, because honestly, this game didn't change my opinion of Jalen Hurts for the good or worse. He's the guy I've always thought he is. He is very good when everything is perfect around him, which it was. His 2 worst throws were when they got pressure, and everything else was phenomenal. And that has been Jalen Hurts. For me to put him in the elite category, which there's maybe 3-4 quarterbacks in that category. So again, saying Jalen Hurts is top 10 is not saying he's a bad quarterback. It's not what I'm saying. I want to see him do it when the defense doesn't play lights out, when he, when his top weapons are out, when it's his show. Similar to, obviously, Patrick Mahomes had a terrible game. There's no doubt about it. But look at his, if you switch them, I feel like the game is exactly the same. Like, Hurts doesn't make the Chiefs any better. Patrick Mahomes, the Eagles can't play any better no matter who's back at quarterback. I mean, I saw one guy say Will Levis probably wins that game. I think that might be a little bit of a crazy reach.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying it's that extreme. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And for me, what I couldn't comprehend is how they were so good at bottling up Saquon Barkley in this game, but so bad at getting pressure. It's like, what? Like, he had all day, every time. Like, he was literally, he was pressured twice. I don't know what the actual stats were, but I feel like it was twice. And he underthrew AJ Brown, which then AJ Brown was up 30, yelling at Sirianni, at least according to the TV copy. And I
I
feel like
think
that
there
wasn't
was a
anything.
missed route or a missed audible or something from what I gathered from that.
That's probably it. And then the other one was the interception, which then Mahomes gave it right back a couple plays later. So no harm,
Yeah.
no foul. But yeah, Hurts played a really good game. Again, I've been the guy that's been like, I don't think he's, an elite quarterback. I think he's a very good quarterback. I would take him over guys like Brock Purdy, who's been in MVP conversations about that. I would take him over Jared Goff because of, but they're all in the same caliber. Like a lot of things need to go right for them. I will say Jalen Hurts has the higher upside. So if we're ranking those three, I'm putting him above both of them. But he just hasn't quite reached that elite level. And part of that is no fault to his own because he has an elite team around him.
Yeah.
Right. And that's always a hard argument. It's like, well, what happens if you switch these players? Well, in fairness, everyone was going to look good on the Philadelphia Eagles behind that offensive line, the way their defense is playing, especially, the last 3 months of the season. Like, there was a lot of things to take away. But what thing you can't argue is that Jalen Hurts didn't play well in that game. And if you try to say, well, anybody can do that, okay. But all he did was exactly what was asked of him. Had 2 errant throws, which even the great ones have 2 bad throws. And the rest of that was pretty perfect.
Exactly. And I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to argue here is I'm not even trying to say he's the best quarterback in the league. Like I said, there's guys out there that surpass him in talent, but I think he at least deserves to be in a conversation a lot higher than he has been. There's people that are like, he shouldn't even be playing quarterback. He can't throw the ball. He's benched. I think he's proven that as much is not true. He can still make plays. He's not a pure pocket passer quarterback, but with where the league is going, he still has a role in this, and he's a playmaker. So sure, don't say he's as good as Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. I think the eye test can even tell you that. But when it comes to going out there, making plays, knowing what he has to do, and taking care of the ball, he's improved a ton in all of that.
So let's do this. Let's plan for this offseason, because I don't want to take away from the Super Bowl to have a quarterback conversation when we have all that free time in the offseason. But let's do like a quarterback ranking show. Just me and you talk it out. We can figure out the logistics, if that's including current age and contract, if that's everybody's the same platform, same team. I think that'd be a fun conversation for the offseason. And so let's plan on doing that. But let's get back to the game itself.
Yeah. I'll go back to your bottling up Saquon Barkley but not getting pressure comment, because I think that was another interesting one. When you look at the Eagles' offensive line, I've said all year how they're so much better at run blocking than pass blocking. And then all of a sudden it felt like the switch just flipped and it was the opposite. But I think part of that was just the Chiefs seemed defensively committed to stopping Saquon Barkley. So they were more worried about blocking up run lanes than they were rushing the passer. And it almost felt like when you're in Madden and you're hitting the play the run first. So whenever there's a play action, everyone bites and then has to retreat and it slows down the pass rush. It almost felt like that. And then with how much, play action the Eagles do run because they're a run first team, it really seemed to affect the Chiefs defense.
Yeah, it definitely did. And that's the, I didn't want to go back to the Jalen Hurts thing, but there wasn't really that many contested throws, because guys were just so wide open. And again, some people will say that's a knock on him, but he's hitting the open guy. That's number one job of a quarterback. So you can't even take that away from it. That it was just there's no other way to put it than pure domination. That's the game was. And as someone, I mentioned this, as someone with a non-rooting interest, in the third quarter, I was literally bored. I was like,
yeah,
what am I going to do at work tomorrow? The freaking Super Bowl. I'm thinking about what I'm going to do at work tomorrow. Do I want to go do some laundry? That's the thing that upset me the most, as again, someone without a fan with, true rooting interest, just wanting a good game, is we're about to go 6 months without meaningful football. And yes, I'm a football sicko. I'm going to get hyped up for the Chargers Packers or the Chargers Vikings or Chargers Eagles, whatever game the Hall of Fame game is. I'll be hyped up for it, to have football back on my TV. But to get this game as the final hoorah, quote unquote, best on best, that stinks.
It
George,
does,
I feel
for
like
sure.
your perspective's a lot different though.
It is, but I think it's because there's a rooting interest. No, because if I try to step back and take myself out of this, the hype just didn't match what ended up happening in the game. And it brings me back to, like I said to you pre-show, the worst Super Bowl in recent memory was Broncos Seahawks. Because that game was over in the second quarter as well. Once the Seahawks got up on, Peyton, he just couldn't get anything rolling. And there was a lot of people describing how the Eagles defense played compared to how the Seahawks Legion of Boom was in that case. And it just felt the same way. So no, there's definitely not a whole lot to talk about else about the game, but I think that this kind of brings up a lot of questions about where the NFL is going to be going next, in my opinion. Like, did the Chiefs get exposed to the point where we're going to see that kind of lull? I'm not going to say they're going to disappear because, Patrick Mahomes is still going to always have them in games, but are we going to have a situation where, like, it was Brady middle part of his career? He was hanging around, but he couldn't quite make it back to the Super Bowls, win a couple of titles. He had like what, a 6-year stretch or something in the middle where he didn't win anything, and then the dynasty came back. Are we going to kind of see that part of Patrick Mahomes' career, or was this just kind of a blip on the radar and they're going to be right back at it?
As much as I don't want to say this, and obviously we have a lot of offseason and I have the right to change my mind, I think we run this game back next year. Third time's the charm. Third time, winner take all, best of three, how you would play, you would do a rock, paper, scissors shoot. Chiefs got them once. Eagles got them down and dirty to prevent the three-peat. I think we'll be right back there with these two teams. Yeah, we can go through the players that might be leaving, but we talked about the Chiefs offensive line, injuries. They're going to get Rashee Rice back. Another year of Xavier Worthy, who had the most receiving yards by a rookie ever in a Super Bowl, which will never get talked about because of how bad they played. This Eagles team is still very deep. I know there's a lot of question marks on some key pieces. Like, can they keep Zach Bond? Can they keep Josh Sweat? Can they keep Milton Williams? Like, those are three. Sweat had 2.5 sacks. Milton Williams had 2 sacks, forced fumble. Zach Bond had a pick. 3 big pieces. But they also have Jalen Carter still there. They have other guys. Like, they're probably going to lose Brandon Graham to retirement. And honestly, like, knowing Howie Roseman, he'll trade Josh Sweat for Myles Garrett somehow. So at the end of the day, doesn't really matter. I think the Eagles Chiefs will be back. I don't think we're quite to the law of the Kansas City Chiefs yet.
I ask it more because we're looking at the competition, the AFC too. And I mean, you can say none of them have beaten Mahomes besides Burrow. Burrow's the only one that's beaten Mahomes in the playoffs. But the Bengals, if they can figure out their defense, they're right back in the conversation. They were only a half a game out of a playoff spot. The Bills, I can argue the Bills played their best season under Allen this year in his entire career. And it's crazy because we thought they were going to fall off. Lamar Jackson's had the best 2-year stretch of his entire career these last 2 years. Like, it feels like with the AFC being built different than the NFC seems more wide open. There's less elite talent and more solid teams. The AFC's elite talent seems to be getting closer and closer to Mahomes, who now in these last few years has had to kind of adjust his play style from that big, flashy whatever to has to take some of the easy throws now. He needs help from his defense, and their defense was fantastic for the most part the last 2 seasons, but it doesn't feel as dominant. So I kind of feel like it's going to be a harder road for Mahomes and the Chiefs coming into the next few years, seeing as where I feel like the rest of the conference is catching up to them.
Yeah, I think there is some so just like the Eagles had to overcome the Chiefs in this game when they did handily, there's some of that with the AFC. And I think when you compare the two divisions, though, is the AFC is built on star quarterbacks.
Yep.
Where the NFC is built on power teams. Like, I know the 49ers had a down year with injuries. They're built top to bottom. Great team. Eagles, probably top to bottom, best team in the league. Lions up there when they're not banged up. Top, even like the other teams that like Commanders, they're not elite at any position, but they're solid on every level.
Mm-hmm.
The Packers started to get a defense, so they're solid. Where it's like the Ravens are probably the closest comparison on top to bottom on the AFC side, but it's still a lot of Lamar. Josh Allen and the Bills, it's all Josh Allen. I know the Bills are an up and down defense. You could argue that the defense is good for the Chiefs now, and there's no playmakers, so it's all Patrick Mahomes on the offense there. So it's like star quarterbacks versus star teams, and I think it's going to be
Yeah.
an interesting dynamic the next couple seasons.
Well, yeah, it's true because I mean, you can take any of those NFC teams that you mentioned for the most part. You can maybe argue not the Commanders and put their wide receiver cores on any of those AFC teams, and you think they get better.
Yeah, and I would argue that outside of the Bengals, who is a star quarterback team, I don't
Mhm.
think they're assuming they get T. Higgins. I think they're have the best, but I think Terry McLaurin would be the best receiver on the Chiefs, the best receiver on the Bills, and definitely the best receiver on the Ravens.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just crazy to me how the star quarterbacks versus star teams, and the AFC has still been very dominant when it comes to the Super Bowl, mostly because you see the Chiefs have been, kind of carrying that load, and they've had the defense. But we've saw now the situation where the solid team was able to kind of put it to shame that the star power on the other side, just because they're like, oh well, you can only hit us one way, we can hit you five.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested to see if the AFC does have to pull that counterpunch, or if you're going to start seeing some of the deeper teams in the AFC come up. The Bengals, if they can find a defense, because I think they're a deeper offense by star power, or the Ravens, who you said are probably the most complete team in the AFC.
Yeah, and also what can these teams do, or how do they keep them together? Like I mentioned, all the pieces that are potentially gone with the Eagles. And,
Mhm.
how what about the 49ers? Can they run that back one more time? Can the Lions, they keep their guys? They're losing all these coaches. Will they regress some just because of that? Like there's a lot of interesting, ways this is going to play out. We have all off season to talk about it and get us excited for the next 6 months without an actual game. We're going to figure out why every team has the best chance to win a Super Bowl. But I think some of the biggest storylines coming out are the biggest unknowns coming out of the Super Bowl, which we need to discuss. And let's start with the Eagles, because that's your second favorite team. Uh, Nick Sirianni getting the Lombardi Trophy. Hey, Kellen Moore, let's run this S word back. We talked about it a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a chance Kellen Moore comes back?
I didn't think there was until I heard, I want to say it was Saturday, that Kellen Moore was like, I don't care if I have another interview in New Orleans, I'm coming back to Philly. And I was like, there's no way. Like, he's supposed to have an interview literally Monday. I guess he rescheduled it because he was on the plane. He was back in Philly today. And something tells me that he is considering sticking with them for one more year, trying to maybe find that better head coaching opportunity, because we've said it time and time again. The Saints aren't a great spot right now. Cap
And
hell, older aging quarterback who's underwhelming. Like, you have to think if he can come run this back again, either make another Super Bowl run or win it, have this offense looking as good as it did down the stretch, he's going to find a better job next year than he is New Orleans.
and you don't obviously want to hear this, but I mean, his best scenario is probably like a one and done in the playoffs. So he has the
That's true.
full smorgasbord of coaching opportunities. But because of the performance, the way Jalen Hurts has progressed, like how is Kellen Moore not the Ben Johnson of next year's class?
If this happens again, I think there has to at least be thoughts of that, because there was a lot of people that were on the Kellen Moore bandwagon and then jumped off, and he didn't have as much coaching buzz last year. And they kind of thought he was a one-trick pony, and he now has proven not only can he put together a solid passing attack, even with a quarterback that people say can't throw the ball too well, but this is the most successful year he's had with running the ball too. So he's shown some kind of dexterity. He's shown he can, coach a complete offense now too. So I think that's really helped him coming to a situation that didn't really fit his offensive coaching style that we saw in Dallas and that we saw in LA.
Yeah, I didn't think I think Kellen Moore might be back. And watch, it'll probably break as we're talking about this that he's, going to take the job starting Monday after the parade or something like that. But I think Kellen Moore is going to run it back because the Saints job is just not that, you know, and it's hard to turn down head coaching jobs because there's only 32 of them. But you've never had one. You've been talked about. I don't think he's going to burn that many bridges by not taking it, unless it comes out that he like told other teams, before the NFC Championship game that he was going to take the Saints job, then let them wait for 2-3 weeks. Like, that's the only way I think that could come back to hurt him, but I doubt that's the situation.
I mean, we've seen that before too. I'm trying to think with who it was.
McDaniels and the Colts.
Oh, and McDaniels, even though he had a failure at head coach before, still ended up getting another job. Failed at that one too, but
yeah. So I think the Eagles get to run it back. But speaking of running it back, the big name that everyone's talking about on the Kansas City Chiefs side is one Mr. Travis Kelce, and does he retire?
I was under the mindset of if the Chiefs won last night, I don't think Kelce had anything more to prove going out a 3-time champion, 3 times straight, 4-time overall champion. Like, I think he would have retired. Now, I'm kind of thinking he's going to stay. But honestly, the smart thing for him to do financially is to retire. Like, he can follow in the footsteps that Jason's already paved because he has a lot of media opportunities. He honestly can be better for himself off the football field. And he's 35. He's going to be 35 years old. Like, it's not like, oh, he's retiring early. No, he's played a full career. And I think there were times this year where you could start to see he's not the same player he was before. Part of that's the Chiefs' offensive scheme changing, but part of it is age.
Yeah, I'm with you. I 100% thought he was going to retire if the Chiefs won. And I don't know if they actually look, but that was my mindset, right? If the Chiefs won, he didn't. Now that they lost, I think I've gone 180. I don't think he retires. I think he does exactly what his brother does. He goes one more year past a Super Bowl loss to try to get redemption. Because winning 3 Super Bowls in a row is an extraordinary feat. But there's still only a select few teams that have won 3 and 4 years, 5 and 7 years kind of thing. Like,
Yep.
I think they could talk him into one last ride. Let's see what we got. And then he can pursue his, because those media gig jobs aren't going anywhere. Like,
I mean,
he's
we
got
saw
them
Tom
locked up.
Brady was out a year before he joined the booth. So,
Yeah. And I don't even know if he'll full on join the booth or if he'll just do New Heights full time or maybe get, NBC Sunday Night Football, replace Chris Sims or something like that. Like,
that's what I expect. I was just using that as an example.
yeah. But I think there'd be a lot of opportunities. So that's where I'm leaning with Travis Kelce.
No, he's the big one because that would change their offense significantly. But I'm expecting him as of now to come back. Obviously, as the offseason goes on, we'll have plenty to talk about with this. If anything breaks while we are not going live here in the next month, we'll keep you guys updated on social media. Maybe we'll pop on and talk for a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, our break, we're doing a quick break, but a little break just to reset. But if there's something big happening, we will definitely have to hop on and talk about it. Is there anything else about this game that you want to dive into? Your biggest takeaway? Like any other, I'm going to ask, what is after this game, who is the most important re-sign on the Eagles, do you think?
I'm going to go ahead and go with Zach Bond. And I know he did get an interception, but I think the eye test kind of was like, oh, Josh Sweat's definitely up in that argument. I think he is, but having elite linebacker play completely changed the Eagles defense. It's something they didn't put a focus on before this. And honestly, signing Zach Bond was along the same exact line. It was like, we're signing him. We're hoping we can get some snaps out of him. He was that spot fill for a year and they were planning to go back to free agency, but their defense took another level. They went from near the bottom to near the top in all defensive categories in one season. So I think that's the most important re-sign on the Eagles.
Yeah, I tend to agree that it's him. I would think is the most important. I get the Josh Sweat one because I think it's either him or Sweat because Sweat plays outside. I think Milton Williams you'd love to have back, but you have Davis, you have Carter, you can
Ojomo
afford,
even actually got a sack in that game. Who would be the next man up?
So
So
you have some options. I won't say you can live without it, but you have options. The now that you've lost Hassan Reddick, you traded him away, you're going to lose Brandon Graham most likely. Like the edge group, you'd have to be a little bit worried about. So I think you can make the argument that he is the most important. And then that's also too, as a Packers fan who literally signed Zach Bond, a similar situation Zach Bond a couple seasons ago with Devondre Campbell, took him for basically the vet minimum. First year starting, becomes an all-pro, have to give him a 5-year mega contract, and then he never reaches that all-pro level. Injuries played a part in that. That's in paying off-ball linebackers is always definitely, something a lot of teams struggle to do with.
it seems like the one team that's done it successfully was the 49ers.
Right. So that's my only concern. But I think to your point, like he seemed to prove as the leader of that defense that it's almost like impossible to see him not back. So I think I would agree that'd be the most important re-sign, at least on the defensive side. I don't know who's all up on. Like Mekhi Becton, I guess, could be thrown in there at guard, but the Eagles find offensive linemen all the time, so I'm not too worried about that.
Exactly, and you can argue they found defensive linemen all the time too. Like they drafted a transitioning safety to play edge rusher this year, and he got a sack in the Super Bowl. They had an outside linebacker in college that ended up being their best pass rusher this season. And I'm talking about Jalix Hunt and Nolan Smith. Like, you can argue they found defensive linemen everywhere too.
Yeah. I mean, even Zach Bond, like the reason he didn't do well with the Saints is because he played on the edge and now they moved him to middle linebacker. So definitely a fascinating situation. Anything else you want to highlight from this historic matchup, George? I feel like you are trying to play it off. Like you're trying not to bring out your full excitement. So I'm going to give you 60 seconds just to talk as much as you want
No,
about
I
your
mean,
Birds winning.
you let me bring out my point about Jalen Hurts and how I think that this positions him as one of the upper echelon quarterbacks. I think the only person I haven't talked about that I think deserves a little bit more credit for this is Nick Sirianni. And it comes down to culture more than anything. There was people that would argue he should have been fired at the end of last season, and that collapse was absolutely horrible. And there was people coming into this season like, I don't even know what he's doing. He signed 2 elite coordinators. He's just there kind of pushing buttons. Like he's not actually making anything happen. But when you saw the reactions from that team after the game and how much, even like he is still involved in offensive game planning, but the big thing that he did was just be a leader of men and bring people together. Something that maybe is a little underrated when you talk about the star power and some of the storylines that you see coming out in the NFL and how that has tended to win Super Bowls lately, not the complete team. He's definitely somebody who has been trashed in the media way more than he's deserved. And maybe it's just now coming to light that, like, yeah, it really was him making a big difference here over the last 3 seasons.
Yeah, and I think to be fair and play a little bit of devil's advocate about Nick Sirianni, one, him being fired last year was just the fact that he plays in Philadelphia. And
Fair.
like they have a loud fan base that expects winning and they can be definitely overreactive. I don't think too many
And I
people
think the national media eats off of that too.
right. Dude, clicks drive content. Like
Yes.
we know that. So like talking about Sirianni getting fired was more of just like let's feed into this hyper over analyzation that Eagles fans have created. But in reality, like he's one of the more winning head coaches. But I will say, and you could say this about a bunch of other coaches too. My one thing, like I never thought Nick Sirianni should get fired. So I'm not saying we're there. One, we've seen successful CEO style head coaches with guys like John Harbaugh. Yep. And he's a CEO style. Mike Tomlin, CEO style. Dan Campbell. So like we've seen successful ones. It's always hard for them to maintain coordinators. And we've seen that with Eagles. I mean, after their last Super Bowl, they were basically gutted completely. Then he had 2 hiring flops, and then he brought in 2 elite guys. The good news is I don't think Fangio is going. I think Fangio is retiring an Eagle. I
Yeah.
don't think he's.
He's
I
kind
think
of
that.
done his head coaching cycles and he's done.
Yeah. So it's the Kellen Moore, and can you find a replacement? And offensive guys, I think, are easier to find. So that's the one thing. But when you talk about culture, there was some rumblings about like how the team perceived him, and it sounds like he's done a lot of, I don't want to say maturing for a guy that's older than me, but like
What is that?
got more comfortable with the head coaching role. So like he's like grown into it more. But the other side of that is winning does cure a lot of cultural issues. So when you go 15-1 over a 16 game span, like no one's upset. So like
Don't
that's
say that. You remember the AJ Brown, Jalen Hurts blow up in the middle of a win streak.
I know that's what I'm saying. Like that happened.
Yeah.
The AJ Brown and him all, but it might have just been fun and all smiles, tough love. Like we saw Travis Kelce shove Andy Reid. No one's talking about their relationship. But like after that one play, there was some issues on the sideline there. Again, I don't want to blow one thing out of proportion, but that's my own like when he faces adversity, which again, it's the same thing conversation with Jalen Hurts. You can't take winning and use that, or the team around him and use that as a crutch. Like he's put the team in position to win games. He's been to the Super Bowl 2 times in 3 years. He won one, he lost the other. He got back there. I agree with you. I think just like Jalen Hurts, I'm still not going to put Nick Sirianni as a top 5 head coach in this league. I'm just not. I don't think it's quite there yet. But I also don't think Dan Campbell's a top 5 head coach either. So, and some people think he's like the best. Maybe it's my bias, whatever. But top 10, heck yeah. Jalen Hurts, same thing. He's not my top 5. He might be 6, but he's not my top 5. But he's definitely in the top 10. So, and I think that pairing has gone really well too. And I think that's an underrated part about this is they're almost opposites in their demeanors at times, which I think helps keep everybody on an even keel level.
Yeah, especially because like they're opposites in attitude, they're opposites in vocality too. Like I argue sometimes in my own head, like Jalen Hurts is not a vocal guy. He definitely was a lot more vocal, and I think he was kind of growing into the leadership role over the season as well. But like AJ Brown was always the vocal guy. And I mean, I can argue that bringing in Saquon Barkley really changed the leadership structure of that team too, because he stepped right in and was especially a big mentor to the young guys, it seemed like, on the offensive side of the ball. But like Sirianni is almost too loud and Hurts is almost too quiet, but maybe that dynamic is exactly what makes it work. Sirianni's bringing Hurts out and Hurts is pulling Sirianni back in a good way, like pulling him back to like where he should be. And you're never going to, I'm never going to say like everyone should love Nick Sirianni, because like, man, he does have that kind of like that swagger that he can be definitely irritating. There's no denying that. It's just the kind of person he is. It's how when he gets hyped up, he can be infuriating. But the culture that he's built, the team feeds off of that. There was even a time where the team was like, we kind of want you to go back to being more vocal, because that kind of confidence, I think, was also bringing it out in the team.
Yeah. And look, I can't argue with it. Like I said, he's won and he just won a Super Bowl. So like, you can't be too, criticized of him. And I mean, what the Eagles have done in general, like they've went to 3 Super Bowls now, 4 Super Bowls in 7 years, 3 in 7 years, won 2 of them, fired the head coach and traded the quarterback 2 years after winning the last one. So Nick Sirianni, you got 2 years. That's what I've heard. No, but
I think Jalen Hurts has ingrained himself into this organization a lot more than Carson Wentz ever did. And you have to remember, Carson Wentz wasn't even on the field for that Super Bowl. He was on the sideline exactly the same way that he was last night.
Yeah, because he blew out his knee in a MVP caliber season. So, but we're not going to talk about injuries. We don't need to bring that up. But, yeah, I think the Eagles So let me ask you this, and I feel like I know your answer, but
Mhm.
moving forward into next season, who do you like better, or who do you think has the better chance to repeat? The Chiefs or the Eagles?
I think it's
And
the Eagles.
obviously, repeat doesn't mean uh win,
The
because the Chiefs
Chiefs
didn't
go
win.
back and win their 3rd and 4, or the Eagles win 2 in a row. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with the Eagles. And I mean, the Chiefs have the pedigree, but I'm still on the fact of like, you really helped convince me through the middle part of the season that the Chiefs were going to be fine. And the Chiefs did start to look better towards the end of the year. But now, after seeing that game, I saw a lot of the cracks that I saw them having in the first 10, 11, 12 weeks of the season in that game just kind of come right back up to the surface. That, along with my argument earlier of feeling like the AFC is catching up to the Chiefs, I think the Chiefs have the harder road to get back and then would have to, essentially play the Eagles again, is what you're saying. I think the Chiefs have the harder road.
That's where I would disagree. I think the Eagles have a better chance to repeat than the Chiefs getting back, based on what we saw last night: ages, contracts, potential departures, all that stuff.
Mhm.
But I think the Eagles will have the harder road, just because, like, going into next season, the Chiefs, barring like a lot of changes, the Chiefs are going to be favored to win their division, right?
Yep.
The Eagles are going to be favored, but the way the Commanders played, I think it's going to be a tougher game. The Cowboys are somehow
You
going to
can
still.
argue the Commanders are better than all the other teams in the AFC West. That's a good point.
That's like, the road's harder, I would say, for the Eagles, but I think they're more talented, so I think that's what makes them have the better chance, despite having to travel, quote unquote, the harder road.
Yeah.
Harder road.
But I mean, look at the rest of the NFC. And I mean, I'll make some good arguments for some good teams. Like the 49ers are going to be right back in it. I think this year was a little bit of a Super Bowl hangover and they had some injuries to deal with, particularly at linebacker and Christian McCaffrey. Big deals. But we're going to get to a point that's really going to hurt them where Deebo Samuel wants out. Like, they're still going to be a tough out, but are they going to be as tough of an out as they were 2 years ago? Who
Is
knows? The
all right,
Rams.
hang on, you brought up Deebo
Okay.
Samuel. I just want to go on the tangent.
Okay.
Is Deebo Samuel leaving that much of a problem for them? Now that they have Ricky Pearsall, they're going to get Brandon Ayuk back. Like, he wasn't the star player that he was this past. Like, I don't know how
He
big of an
wasn't
impact.
he wasn't the star player this year that he was in the past, but I feel like in the past, it was always the him versus Brandon Ayuk argument. When Brandon Ayuk wasn't in the lineup, they were more consistent. Whenever Deebo Samuel was in the lineup, I felt like their offense looked like it was missing something because of his being able to be dynamic and play multiple different positions. I feel like Deebo Samuel's still a very important part of that team, and they're going to feel it to at least some extent.
I guess I'm a little bit different. I think with Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Brandon Ayuk, getting CMC healthy, I think moving on from Debo makes a ton of sense. Obviously, I guess to your point though, like, you never get better by subtraction, or
Yeah.
you rarely get better by subtraction. So, in that standpoint, I understand that.
Mm-hmm. But no, I'm still saying they're going to improve over where they were this year. I just don't know if they're going to be as good as they were 2 years ago. That's my question on it.
Gotcha.
I'm going to give some shout out to the Rams because the Rams with Sean McVay, any year they have a shot. But then we talked about them talking about getting rid of Cooper Kupp. Your argument makes sense where like you never know what they're going to be able to do with the space. Are they going to try to find a way to fill 2 holes by getting rid of one aging wide receiver? Maybe they can end up being better, but could I argue I would feel like the Rams are harder out than the Bills or the Ravens? I think the Bills and Ravens are harder out. The Commanders being your division, that's a tough one. That one I get. The Lions have to show me playoff success before I really believe that they're going to be the problem in the playoffs. They are a very good regular season team. They definitely could come out there and make the run next year. I'm not saying they can, but they haven't had the postseason success yet. Like, I just feel like there's tougher opponents and familiarity in the AFC than there is in the NFC.
You forgot one team, and I'm very upset with you.
The Green Bay Packers,
The
who
team,
I think are a corner and a wide receiver away from being a very big contender.
and that was my biggest takeaway from the game was the Packers felt closer to a Super Bowl, and maybe this is just me being a fan, and if it is, you can tell me in the comments. I don't. Feel free. Or George can tell me. Closer than I gave them credit for. They held the Eagles to their lowest point total in the postseason. They competed with them all the way to the very end in week 1. Despite 3 turnovers, they competed all the way to the end of that game against them in the playoffs. And I think if I asked George this, and he wouldn't just say this because I'm his friend, the team that scared him the most in the playoffs was the Green Bay Packers.
I'm pretty sure I said that before the playoffs started. So you can even go back, if you don't believe Cody saying this, to preview of Wild Card Weekend or the end of Week 18, and I was like, I don't want to play the Packers. The Packers scared me. And their lack of wide receiver consistency and the injuries they ended up sustaining ended up making it so that they couldn't make that final push. But I think now that we look at this with hindsight, we were all in on the Lions. We were worried about the Eagles if they ever had to pass the ball. We thought the Vikings were all that. The Vikings ended up having quarterback problems because Darnold didn't show up in the playoffs. I can argue the 3 best teams in the NFC playoffs were the Eagles, Rams, and Packers. 2 of those teams people weren't worried about for the most part.
And the Eagles beat them.
And the Eagles ended up beating those 2. So I could argue that the best 3 teams in the NFC playoffs were the Eagles, Rams, and Packers.
Yeah, I think Commanders fans would probably have an issue with that, the way they played against Sutton's Lions. But then the counterpoint is, did you see how they played against the Eagles compared to the other 2? So that's definitely a fascinating conversation. We're going to have all offseason to talk about that. Anything else before we move on to some other news and notes about this game?
I hit all the points I wanted to hit. So,
all right.
If you have any other questions for me as we go, we'll jump right back through. But what else do you want to talk about here?
So we can get to that, but I just want everyone to remember, George might be wearing an Eagles jersey, but it is his second favorite team.
I'm a Chargers fan. I don't know what you're talking about. He loaded a video in here. This guy.
While you were talking, I got the clip ready. I was like, I'm going to play that out. But no, congrats, George. Congrats.
The worst part is I'm wearing a blue shirt in that video. That is horrible.
I know. My favorite video of all time. But no, the NFL, it was Super Bowl Sunday, and one Mr. Aaron Rodgers was still in the headlines, as Jay Glazer reported on the Fox pregame show, which George probably missed because he was doing paces to keep his heart down as the game was getting ready to kick off.
Fair point.
That last week, the Jets and Aaron flew back to New Jersey. They had a conversation, and they basically said, we're moving on. So 2 things to think about that. 1, doesn't look like he's going to be back on the Jets. 2, you have to think if Aaron was willing to fly back to the New York to have a conversation, he's at least strongly considering playing in 2025. Maybe because he has to go to a new team, that changes the situation. But that's something worth monitoring. So if you've been a long-time listener to this show, #Rodgers Watch will be back come March, maybe sooner if something does break. And then his counterpart, Davante Adams, has not heard from the team since they have hired a new head coach and GM, with all signs of him also being let go because of his high cap number. And it's rumored that he either wants to go back to Green Bay or, more importantly, wants to play on the West Coast. So we talked about the Rams potentially moving on from Cooper Kupp. They could replace him with Davante Adams. Doesn't make a ton of sense, but you could see that. But the team I'm looking for out, we could talk about the 49ers replacing him with Debo, which I think would be an upgrade. But the Chargers getting Justin Herbert, Davante Adams, that could be an interesting pairing that could change the conversation about the Chiefs and their likelihood of being able to walk away with that division.
I mean, we talked about it a lot of this season where we're like, the Chargers are definitely not the most talented team. They were a very young team for the most part, but they were a very well-coached team after they brought in Harbaugh. So being able to go out there and you kind of hit the reset button, still knowing that you have Herbert for many years and he's still a fairly young quarterback, to then be like, okay, we got you Ladd McConkey. That was a very good start. Bring in the superstar wide receiver to go with that and then keep building through the draft and free agency. They definitely could be a contender. They already exceeded expectations this season. So I think that would be a very intriguing place for Davante Adams, but I know you would rather see him in Green Bay. And I think putting him in Green Bay again with Jordan Love would be the exact same situation. They don't quite have the Lad McConkey in Green Bay, but you can argue that Jaden Reed's been fantastic when he's been, healthy and, consistent. Romeo Doubs has been fine. Christian Watson's been a great deep threat, but he hasn't been able to stay on the field at all. But if you take all three of those guys and move them into supporting roles for a star wide receiver, it looks a lot better than having to rely on them as your number one option. So either of those two spots make amazing sense for Davante Adams, and he can still make a major impact at this point in his career.
Yeah, I think we'll have to wait and see. That's something will play out. And then we hit on the Deebo Samuel trade request. Is there any teams that you do think it makes sense for them to acquire a Deebo Samuel? Because his skill set is unique.
His skill set is unique. I feel like we're kind of in the same boat of like what teams were looking for this and that. I would hate to see it. A place where I think he would thrive at this point is in Washington.
As the number 2 with Terry. That's a good
As pick. The number 2 with Terry. They already brought in a guy that can kind of be that mesh player. And I don't think we quite saw it come out too much this year when they brought in Austin Eckler. And maybe I'm just an Austin Eckler guy, but we saw how much he could be used in the pass game.
You're a what?
I didn't say what you thought I said. I'm a Chargers fan. I don't know what you're talking about. But bringing in Deebo Samuel, I think, could add an element to that offense. And really, again, when we talk about taking young quarterbacks, bringing in star wide receivers, hopefully Deebo Samuel can still get to that, and see how much it elevates their play. So that would be a very intriguing spot to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Commanders, I think they're going to make a lot of sense for both teams. The other one, though, I could see like New England would be, getting an older veteran, true number 1, kind of a fun piece for Josh McDaniels. I think that could be an interesting situation. So I have 2 last things I want to talk about the Super Bowl with, and then we could probably get ready to head out of here. One, if we learned anything from this, it's what we learned from the Super Bowl. That's what I'm calling it. What we learned from the Super Bowl. 1, Tennessee Titans draft Abdul Carter. Just do that.
Yes. 100%.
2, get Jameis Winston a TV show.
Oh my gosh. Jameis Winston was pure entertainment all year long. And I think it culminated with at Super Bowl opening night, he went to AJ Brown's booth and he was like, "Will you do this dance for me?" And he's like, "Yeah, I got you." And then there was video of him coming out during the game like a schoolgirl, like, he did the dance. He said he would do it and he did it.
Yeah. Jameis Winston, national treasure. I hope that he gets to continue playing if he wants, but that is another man that has media written all over him. Probably not your traditional thing, but what he did for Fox coverage, just give that man a mic and let him walk around and talk, was a lot of fun.
More cowbell.
George, I throwing you on the spot here. Okay. What's the thing you learned from the Super Bowl?
Man, yeah, you really are throwing me on the spot here. For whatever reason, what kept coming back to me when I was watching the Chiefs most of the year, and then especially in the Super Bowl, was we tried to talk about how devaluing the running back position was happening, and I think they're starting to come back. I think people were underestimating star wide receiver talent as well. And like we talk about how the AFC teams, their star quarterbacks don't have that supporting cast. We saw a lot of flops down the stretch with guys who just didn't have the wide receivers to get it done. And there was so many ugly drops, plays where Mahomes really showed his skills and like didn't really have anybody that was making a play for him. And it just took me back to like, we talked about how the Chiefs weren't going to get it done when they traded away Tyreek Hill. Man, were we wrong? They did for 2 seasons, but I think we finally got to the point where them trying to plug and play pieces reared its ugly head. That might still not be the case next year. They still have Rashee Rice, who's going to be back, and he really showed a lot of promise for his injury. That's fair. You're right. There's a lot of off-field issues, too, we're forgetting about on this one. And Xavier Worthy had a fantastic game that was overshadowed by the fact that they were down big. But their star wide receivers, I think, are going to be at a premium. And I'm not talking about the guys like DeAndre Hopkins, who's at the end of his career, that obviously is the big name value, but couldn't make a play in the biggest moment when he's wide open 20 yards down the field. Some of these guys that we're talking about with trade requests, Cooper Kupp, if he still has more in the tank, Deebo Samuel, the biggest example, should be coveted by some of these teams that are looking for top end wide receivers that are contenders.
Imagine T. Higgins going to the Chiefs. Bengals fans would hate it. The Bengals themselves would hate it. The Chiefs would love it. That'd be fun. All right, we made it 55 minutes. And this is my one thing I wanted to talk about that is going to be forgotten about. And I'm okay with it being forgotten about. But the game was not close, so that's why we're not talking about it. Yet, still a pretty terribly officiated game.
Yeah, it was. I won't lie. I mean, you saw my reaction on the first drive, Eagles drive of the game, when they called A.J. Brown for offensive pass interference. I was livid. But then ended up going both ways. There was a horrible hit to the head on a defenseless receiver on Dallas Goedert that was like a shove to the face mask, basically.
That literally took away an incomplete on 3rd and 26 and gave him a first down.
Exactly. And
Jalen Carter smacking Mahomes' his face on the fumble.
Yup.
What?
I don't understand how the Eagles long snapper was called for 2 false starts.
Yeah, it was just an interesting.
It was it was at the same time ticky-tacky, and they didn't call obvious stuff also. It was like, it was just all over the board, which officiating consistency is what I care about. And that's not what you saw in that game. And it's not going to matter because it's the same exact thing that we saw in the NFC Championship game. That was one of the worst officiated games of the season. The Eagles put up 55 points. They weren't catching them anyway. The Eagles dominated this game. It wasn't going to change the outcome of the game. But it still needs to be something that should be looked at in the offseason. And I hope that all the media day people getting at Goodell, people getting at the Chiefs, really opens up the NFL's eyes to make some kind of change, whether it's something, big to try to, make more things reviewable, or make a sky judge have something to keep them honest, or be able to drop a flag if something's obvious, or at the least make your officials full time, please.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't want more reviews because in the heart of the moment, like, was it a penalty? I'm talking about the Jalen Carter thing. And the game was probably sealed at this point. Was it a penalty? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It 100% was. There's no denying that. But could you imagine the sky judge is like, oh, they touched his helmet. Let's drop the flag. Eagles fans are upset. They're probably okay because they're still up 30 points. But let's imagine like that was their chance to get the ball back. Right? Like
that's the defending Mahomes thing as well. And when that was the storyline coming into the week, when it's like Mahomes gets everything called, it's amazing that was the most obvious thing that they should have called and they didn't. But there's been way less that they've called for Mahomes before.
I mean, and the Eagles got a lot of calls over the last two games too. Yeah. Like, I don't want to just say it's all about Mahomes, but that's enough official talk. But George, I think that is it for our big game reactions. You get to watch your second favorite team win a second Super Bowl, which we're happy for you. Hopefully the Packers will be back there next year. Oh, I got one more thing. I completely forgot. And it's a great way to end it.
All right.
I got to pull the list up. Eagles win.
Yes.
They're obviously getting the home opener for next year. So let's take a look at their potential road teams, the teams that are coming to face them, and which game do you want it to be the most? And then I perhaps will wrap it up. Commanders, Cowboys, Giants, Bears, Lions, Raiders, Rams, or Broncos. Which game do you think the NFL will kick off the season with?
I think it's between 3.
I think so too. I wonder if it's the same 3.
The 3 I'm thinking are the Commanders, the Lions, and the Rams.
Those are the 3 I thought as well. 4th would be the Cowboys if the Cowboys had like a big offseason. Yeah. But I don't know if they would waste Cowboys Eagles on week 1.
Agreed. And I'm also thinking because it's divisional, I don't know if they would put Eagles Commanders week 1. So I'm thinking that's the least likely of the 3 to me. the NFL likes to play playoff rematches. So I think my most likely is Eagles Rams as the, rematch of the snow game. But I would not be shocked to see Eagles Lions, because Eagles Lions is going to be a highly sought after matchup for networks next season.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Eagles Rams. It's, a different, it's not divisional. I think Commanders Rams or Commanders Eagles could get the game, like start with divisional, start it with like a big game. But I think because of the blowout in the NFC Championship, that's what ultimately does it for you.
That's
And then
fair.
obviously the Lions, they started off, 2 games versus they start off against the Chiefs after they won the Super Bowl, and that kind of kickstarted their oh, this is a legit team now. So if they went that route, I could see it either being, if I wanted to throw 2 extreme X factors in there, the Broncos as hey, this team made the playoffs, let's give them a game.
Mm-hmm.
Vic Fangio's old, that's where he was head coaching before. Could be that. Or the Bears. They just got the big name, Ben Johnson, Caleb Williams. They didn't prove anything, so I highly doubt it'll be that one. But if they wanted to go outside the box, because that's how we were thinking what happened when they named it Chiefs Lions, and it turned out to be the start of something. So something to monitor there.
Yeah, you convinced me about the Broncos being a possibility. But if I had to put my betting hat on right now, I'm going Rams.
Yeah, unless they trade Matt Stafford. And then
that'd be a completely different situation. Then we're going Lions.
But I think before we talk about Matt Stafford getting traded, we need to take a break from this podcast. So what does that mean for you guys? That means we are on break until March 6th. Following us on social media to know that. We'll be back. If any big news does happen, though, George and I will hop on and we'll make a TikTok about it. If a big retirement, a big trade. So you can trust the Couch GMs to continue covering the league, covering football, talking fantasy football, because that's back up, talking dynasty drafts, rookies, all that fun stuff. So for a couple of weeks, you'll have to be without us. I'm Cody Roadcap. That's George Kurd. Thank you for an incredible football season. Shout out to the Eagles for winning it, and stay safe at the parade.